Without further ado, we are going to get started with this session. I am very pleased to introduce the discussants for this session, Luke Davis, Jennifer Edelman, Rufaz Zaki, and Sheila Shenoy. Also, Dr. Karthik Sundaram will be presenting first for effectiveness of video observed therapy in the management of tuberculosis, multi-district randomized controlled trial, and Claudia will present afterwards. I think we've all heard enough speaker bios for today, and we are running just a little bit late, so I'm just going to dive right in with Dr. Sundaram and let you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man. So yeah, since we are running late of time, good morning everyone. So I'm going to share my proposal application status and what are my research. So first let me introduce myself. My name is Karthik. And I'm doing year 3 of DRPH under the guidance of Prof. Victor and also Prof. Hamza. So my topic of study is effectiveness of video observed therapy in management of TB. So the study includes, the study talks about TB. So as we know how the TB is an infectious disease, blah 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 blah. So it has 1.8 million lives lost in 2020 alone. So for TB, we always know that DOTS are introduced. So DOTS are it's basically visually observed TB medication for 6 months. So in Malaysia, we're still using that currently. For 6 months, the patient have to come to the nearest health clinic, and then the healthcare workers will observe them. But what happens in Malaysia is the compliance to DOTS is being tried right now. So 1 out of 10 TB patients are defaulting the medication, and this could be a various reason: logistic, cost of transport, distance to healthcare. And one of the studies says like it costs approximately 3,000 ringgit for the span of 6 months. So what happens if they don't come every day, daily for their drug observation? So it leads to poor compliance, and then also what happens is the entire TB regimes get defaulted and they have to repeat back, and also it leads to multi-drug TB resistance, where again leads to extended TB DOTS for 18 months or so. So the TB rate in Malaysia is 92. We are still categorized as low intermediate TB burden country. So what I'm trying to propose here is to introduce a video observed treatment therapy where a patient will be able to conduct a live teleconference with healthcare provider instead of them coming physically and report their drug administration. So this proposed intervention could improve treatment compliance, treatment costs, and reduce the risk. This is during the last time. So reduce the risk of COVID and infections. So this is an example how a VOT works. So a guided step-line flow is introduced, and it takes approximately 5 minutes for the patients to teleconference and report the TB injection. So the research question is, what is the effectiveness of VOT compared to the traditional DOTS which is being conducted in KKM? So it's a simple RCT study. So the general objective is to compare the effectiveness. So the specific is to develop VOT intervention to compare the effectiveness and also to measure patient satisfaction using VOT. So the study consists of 2 phases. The first one is to develop VOT intervention. Second one is to compare the effectiveness itself. So I'm not going to go into this. So phase 2 is development of the VOT. So there are 2 arms. One is a VOT and another one is the traditional DOTS, and we're going to monitor and look at the outcome assessment. So the main outcome which I'm looking at is obviously the treatment adherence. We're going to look at 60 days of intensive period, as we know that treatment of DOTS divided into intensive and also maintenance. And the secondary outcome is the seroconversion, side effects, degree of satisfaction, overall time spent, money spent, and everything. So my current hurdle right now is the cost of entire thesis or the study will cost approximately 29,000 to 56,000. So I desperately need a grant for it. So what happened was I applied for a grant. My third supervisor promised me a grant, and the grant was unfortunately rejected. But I'm not sure what's the reason. So I went and applied second grant with the Selangor State Government, again got rejected. So, and then I applied for the third one, which is Dr. Ranjit Bhagwan's UMS grant. The result is still pending, so I call them up every 2 weeks or so, but they're not promising me anything. So there could be something wrong in my grant writing, so that's what I'm sharing my experience here. So basically with this study or with this intervention, it could help to improve the patient treatment adherence and also to reduce the healthcare burden without compromising the treatment. So thank you for the attention for this TV. So I'd like to hear it from the panel itself.
Can I just ask you one question? Sorry, you might want to.
Can you stay at the microphone because we were going to have a few questions.
Okay, sure.
Just can you give a little more detail on what the feedback was that you were given for those grants when they were rejected?
The first one, Doctor, thank you for the question. So the first one, I'm not sure what is the official, but because this was applied by the third supervisor, I'm not sure what's the reason. The second one, they said that they are not ready for the app yet. So when the app is, they're not ready to create the app yet. So that's the thing.
Sorry, the funder is not ready to create the app, or they don't want to support the creation of the app. I guess we thought you were creating the app.
Yeah, we are creating the app, but they said that probably we are not ready. Malaysia doesn't need it yet, or something like that. But I shared the response given that, so there's no specifics given.
Thank you for presenting the proposal. I'm hoping you can comment a little bit more on a couple of things. One, you mentioned that this is trying to address the approximately 10% of patients who are lost to follow-up. I'm not sure if your proposal is going to focus on people who, on all patients, starting the intensive phase, or a certain segment who are particularly high risk for loss to follow-up. If the focus is on supporting adherence or just measuring, is it an intervention or are you trying to measure?
It's an intervention. And we're looking at the intensive phase because intensive phase is the main part where the most of the bacteria will be killed. So that's why we're trying to focus on the intensive phase, but it's more on the intervention.
For all comers, for all patients?
Yes, for all comers. So it's a method of observation. We're just changing the method of observation. Instead of face-to-face, and we're doing it with teleconference. I didn't get the first part though, sorry. The 10%, is it?
Do you know, have you investigated the reasons why the 10% are not adhering or are lost to follow-up? Like, I'm trying to understand how this intervention meets the need, and I don't know that you presented what the needs are.
Okay. So the 10% why they don't come to this thing is we had a systematic study done, literature review. So most of them, there are a few factors. So since I'm only given 5 minutes, so I didn't want to take up much time. So most of the things were complained was like a cost of travel from their residents to the healthcare, and also time spent. So some of them have to take 3 hours of their work time to come to the healthcare facility for the daily drug observation. So that is second hurdle. And the third one is waiting time in the clinic itself. It's a big hurdle for them. So these are the few factors that leads for them not to come to the clinic itself.
Do they have to come daily or once a month?
Daily, for 6 months.
Thank you so much. This is a really exciting technology, and I think there's a lot of opportunity potentially to frame your proposal and try to find funding for it. And I guess maybe a few ways of thinking about it. I think one, it would be helpful when you set out the proposal to describe, I think as Dr. Shenoy sort of suggesting, what's the usual care that you'd be comparing against within the rehabilitation strategy. You've described sort of daily daily directly observed therapy requiring visits to the clinic. And and kind of identifying, what some of those barriers are and sort of describing how the video observed therapy would be addressing that. So for example, video observed therapy allows you to relocate the location of the adherence from coming to the clinic to being at home and sort of addressing that travel barrier. So it's sort of obvious, but it also kind of helps explain how you're thinking about the intervention. Second, is it actually going to improve adherence, or is it just going to enhance the ability to monitor adherence? And so kind of identifying what are patient preferences about how they like to use the video observed therapy. That would be interesting. It'd be helpful also to hear a little bit about how you would actually do this. Are you going to build an app to do it? Are you going to use videos on people's phones and just have them email them or text them? Are you going to build a platform onto WhatsApp? I think some of those details would be helpful to kind of hear about to understand more. Then I think probably the third thing, probably my biggest suggestion, would be to think about what's the state of the literature about video observed therapy at this point. There now in the last 3 to 5 years, there have been a lot of studies that were published. I know there's a systematic review 6 years ago where there was nothing, and now a bunch of things have just come out. And so the field may have moved a little bit during this time that you're a supervisor and you've been submitting grants. And it may be at the point now that we know that it's feasible and effective in many places, but the question is, how could it perform here in Malaysia? So bringing out what's different about the Malaysian context that you'd be doing to kind of adapt this, and thinking about not just the effectiveness, but the implementation. What would be the challenges to implementing and actually nesting in specific measures of implementation, like feasibility, acceptability, appropriateness, and then kind of showing, what proportion of visits are being captured, kind of showing along with the adherence. Those would be some kind of thoughts that I have. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm going to pass the microphone around, and and then maybe we can take some comments after that.
I just want to add, first, I think in the grant writing world and research, one of the things that we talk about is that, there's many keys for continuing the research path, and the first is persistence, right? And so continuing to keep on, keeping on.
I don't lose the
So
patience.
that's great. In regards to reading your grant proposal, a couple of things that struck me that I think could be clarified is thinking through the patient flow. So you talk about once the recruitment process is over, they'll be randomized. You probably want to articulate that there's going to be an informed consent process and then collection of baseline data, and more carefully articulate what measures you're using. You talk about using validated tools, but don't specify what those measures are and what you're going to be assessing. And so I think from a grantsmanship perspective, spending a little more time and clarifying that would be really helpful. So just wanted to add that to the comments that have already been raised.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kartik, for the presentation. For me, I think it's a good project, but I think, of course, presenting it is another thing, but when you're writing a grant proposal, you need to highlight things that in your write-up. So, I'm sure you remember the lecture by Prof. Rick on the one about the writing grant proposal. So when I read your grant, I think there are a few things I want to highlight. Okay, the objective is good, but I think it's good like if you can highlight whether it's a clinical outcome, implementation outcome, like Prof. mentioned. And in terms of gap, I know that you mentioned that there's a poor attendance, but if you remember the lecture earlier by Prof. you need to show data. How big is the gap? In the proposal, there's nothing mentioned about that. How much that you need to improve the gap that happening in Malaysia at the moment. And I feel that the evidence on the effectiveness of e-monitoring is still not. I'm not convincing by reading your proposal. Maybe you can show evidence from other countries or other settings that have applied video-assisted consultation, things like that. Okay, and then method. Yes, I think method also is not in depth. There are things already highlighted, and for me, even your intervention, the video or the medium of the show and here is still not clear what is it being developed, are you going to add on it? So that is not clear. So when you want to present to others, when the reader, they should be able to imagine, how is this intervention going to look like? So at the moment, by reading your proposal, I cannot imagine how this is going to be able to finally, when you want to promote your grant, the three things that you have to highlight. What is the activity that you're going to conduct to answer your objective, and then from the activity, what outcome that you will have from the research, and what is the impact that you have from the outcome. So impact is a bit more long term. So of course you talk about improve adherence, but in the end, the ultimate is we want them to have better, less complication, better outcome, and also another thing we do want to reduce MDR, because that's another aim that we want. We want when they comply, and so we don't want them to go to MDR, and of course you can talk about cost, cost treatment, and also cost if complication and MDR. And another thing I think what you can add is about patient empowerment, because patient is doing that session themselves, so they need to have some knowledge and some encouragement to VOT, so that they'll be able to engage with the online consultation. So I think there's a few things that you can improve. Perhaps later we can, because you are now become a student, we can help you with the
Thank you.
Any comment from others?
Thank you again for this proposal. Just to continue from what I was mentioning before, I think there's a lack of information about what's been done up until this point to show the feasibility of this technology with patients. That data or that information may exist, but I don't think I saw it in the proposal. Are patients able to use this technology? Are they willing to use this technology? Is it acceptable? And then talk about costs measurements being driving force, but it seems like there's going to be a lot of effort on the part of the patient to use this technology. They have to come to the central office and get instruction, download it onto their phone, and learn how to use it. Just demonstrating that all of that is feasible and part of the patient. It's important to show this. Are there other comments from the audience?
Any questions?
We were just talking about the methods, I think also being more explicit about who are the participants, who are the explicit inclusion and exclusion criteria will be really important, right? So that people can, you can want the methods to, someone to be able to take your protocol and understand exactly what you're planning, what it will look like, and then they could reproduce it just based on the description. And so adding more specificity will be really helpful. Do you have questions about that? These are all things you can do, so that's good. Do you have questions about any of that?
I got two questions actually. So to the panel. So when we are doing some proposal like this, a grant proposal, when we are doing the grant, I mean the budget for the cost and everything. So do we have to be really realistic about it, or could we go a bit higher range? Because like we are not sure that there will be an unforeseen cost that we can overlook. That was that's one question that I always come across. And the second part is, Prof. Rick mentioned that the grant proposal should be within 15 pages or lesser than that. So with all this information that you guys are suggesting, so will it be a boring grant proposal, or is it, like, how does it going to work?
So I think you want to be as realistic with the budget as possible, right? So that it demonstrates you have understanding of what it's going to take, right? So that would be my first suggestion. With regards to how to prepare the grant proposal, it depends on the specifics of the requirements for that particular grant and what the expectations are, and making sure you follow those specific guidelines. So that's variable, I think, depending on where you're submitting. So if there's a word count, you better follow that word count, right?
Okay.
So, yes, different grants have different criteria. Some grant only require 2 pages, some require 15 pages, some require like many pages of information that you have to submit. So you need to read what the requirement, what need to be. And another thing is you need to know what is the purpose of the grant and what is it for. You can submit a grant on the same topic, but for example, if you targeting a grant information research. So you need to highlight maybe information like maybe framework, the key keywords that actually related to implementation side. But if the research is more towards community grant outreach, so the highlight of your writing will be towards how actually your research can contribute towards the community and the end. So again, this is go back to what grant that actually you are applying to. So you really have to tally your proposal according to grant. You cannot just have one template and then you apply different grant with the same template. You have to adjust your grant.
Just one comment, I don't know if others behind me have comments, but if you can get examples, for example, for successful grants to the State Health Initiatives project, right? And use that as a guide, that could be really helpful. I don't know if you have colleagues who've had successful applications from the same funder, just one idea, right? So I don't know if there's a repository of grants, but we always said, find a great example from a colleague that's willing to share and use that to help inform, like how specific can you be, what are the expectations, that can be really useful. Other comments, questions from the group?
Maybe I have a comment about what to do when you don't get your grant, because unfortunately I think a lot of times when you get encouraged to write a grant, you don't get told how often you get rejected, and it can be very frustrating. Sometimes you feel like you haven't put something good together, but it's just a natural part of the scientific process. A couple things you can think about is if this project feels too ambitious to one of the funders. I think you mentioned that they said that they thought Malaysia wasn't ready for this technology. I mean, I think about going back to them and asking them, you could highlight how the literature has come along now. There's lots of studies suggesting that this is really helpful and some of the advantages. If they feel like it's too much for them at this point for you to do all this, would they be interested in funding something smaller, maybe a pilot study, a feasibility study? And kind of similarly, as you're waiting to hear back from grants or preparing the next proposal, is there anything you could do to gather some preliminary data about this? For example, could you just do a survey of patients in the clinic and see how open they would be to something like this? Could be something small that doesn't require a lot of money. You could also survey maybe other policymakers to see how interested they are in this technology, to try to build support with the funder that there really is time where there's the country's ready to actually take this on. So that's just a couple of ideas. Any other questions for Kartik? Kartik, any other questions for us?
No, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. It was a wonderful grant application, and I look forward to hearing more in the future about your success.
And thanks for the opportunity as well.
Absolutely. The next session, where Dr. Claudia unfortunately cannot make it today, so she won't be presenting it, but her colleague Perna will be here for the feedback from the panel. So I don't know how best to do this. I think it's probably best to just sort of summarize the grant and kind of go through it on the big screen, if that's okay. Do one of you feel comfortable summarizing it? Or perhaps, Aparna, do you feel comfortable summarizing the grant just slightly? You do? Okay, wonderful. Would you like to come over here and sit with the panel? Okay, thank you.
You can go to the stage.
I know you're not presenting, but just a quick summary if you can. Thank you.
Thanks. So Dr. Claudia is not around, and she would have been presenting this. So just to clarify, this is not a grant. That based on this strategy or the approach that we are taking forward as our next package of work at UNO-IIGH, we will be applying for different grants based on these approaches and objectives that we have kind of listed out. So basically, as we are having 2-3 broad strategies for the next 5 years at UNO-IIGH, and one of the strategies is to work on the digital health governance. And in that we are looking at, as a stand from UNO-IIGH, we generally don't, our main work is to generate evidence that can drive policies and programs. So based on that, we are looking at digital health governance from 3-4 lenses, which is mainly looking at intersectionalities, how digital health has intersectionalities with gender, with race, and the lenses that we are looking at is decolonial feminism. These might seem like very big words at outer level, but that is how we are looking at. So some of the objectives that I will say for this approach or strategies that we are going to generate and disseminate research evidences to demonstrate risk and negative effects resulting from use of unregulated digital health technologies. We are also thinking of strengthening overall understanding and clarity on the role of AI in health, particularly in the low-middle income countries. Then we are also going to work around facilitating knowledge exchange of effective governance practices and risk mitigation strategies, especially for communities like marginalized or those who are left behind. And then we are also going to work around WHO's SMART guidelines and strengthen the knowledge and skills of stakeholders to implement the digital health guidelines. And also we will be developing some digital health tools based on which are more gender transformative designs. And then we have also like kind of what to say, like we also have a lot of emphasis on South-South collaboration, so we will be collaborating with different agencies within the Global South for working on this global health governance. So this is the broadly I'm telling you, and these are not these are just approaches and strategies we are looking forward to take, and we will be applying for grants based on these approaches and lenses. Probably what Professor Claudia would have liked is to get an sense how the audience and the experts see these approaches for the coming next year in the field of global health and how we can contribute towards that, and how what is more needed when we need to apply for such grants. She had some questions in mind that if the approach, like if you had a chance to go through the document that she had shared probably last evening, that if these approaches that are outlined are the right one, and are there any need for additional dimensions which UNU-IIJ should consider in developing this package, and is the modus operandi outlined is the right one for the digital health governance, and what additional suggestions you have, and what about the tactics, like how to develop this further. So this is a broad idea, but and I'm not the right person, like I'm not exactly working on the strategies, but I'm just trying to take feedback on her behalf. But I would be happy to kind of take any questions if I can answer, or mostly take the feedback from the experts and audience here. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, I think when first I read this, I thought, okay, this is something, it's not a typical grant proposal. So it's you are come up with the strategies to still with the aim of you want to get funding from some organization that recently submitted to WHO to request fund for you to run your project. I don't have experience in applying this kind of budget, but I think when I read it as again requesting something. So again, first we have to look at the justification and objective and how you're going to answer the objective. For me, I mean, there's some write-up on the background on the issue, but again, I think with my statistics background, there's no numbers, I don't see numbers, data, say how much how big is the gap. So I think if you have that kind of information, it will help to convince the funders to